Hi, welcome to my review of the Deepmind 12 and the OB6. They are completely different instruments, and the idea of this isn't to see which one stacks up better against the other, because that's not really a fair comparison, is it? I've done the Deepmind 12 versus the 106 because they're based around the same sort of architecture and the same sort of ethos. This was originally going to be a clone of the 106. I looked at the Prophet 6 from a cost perspective. Why is the Prophet 6 3 or 4 times as much as that? Not just the Prophet 6, but synths in general. So this is really just a bit of nerdy synth fun. Seeing if I can get close to this with this, which you can, it's got the 2-pole filter on it, but you are limited with the oscillators. And really, just why does this sound different to a lot of synths? And while I've been playing around and trying to compare and match patches, I've noticed that this, as soon as you start stacking oscillators up, it sort of has a lovely sort of drifty, wavy, sort of rich, lush feel, which not a lot of synths do. So it's not anything negative about this one. It's more what makes this unique, I suppose. As far as architecture goes, take a look at the Prophet 6 versus Deepmind 12 review I did, because the architecture on this is very, very similar to the Pro 6. So the sort of pros and cons where the oscillators are different. You've got the sub, you've got the modulation section on this, and on this you've got more modulation, routing capability, and you've got the sort of really fully fledged effects units in there. So take a look at the Prophet 6 versus the Deepmind 12 for all that. Let's just jump in quickly with the oscillators. Here we've got a sawtooth. So nice and similar. I always say that about sawtooth. I sort of don't know why I do compare them, but they do sound different sometimes. This goes from a sawtooth to a square. Actually, on VCO2 it goes from a triangle to a sawtooth to a square, which VCO1 doesn't do. Just show you that quickly. Not sure why that is, why this doesn't do them all as well, but maybe it's just a legacy thing. That's what old Oberheims used to do, no idea. Seems a bit strange to me why he wouldn't just bother doing it, but... And this, you've got the sawtooth and the pulse, or them both together. Which is a bit like this halfway. And what you'll notice there is when I'm adding these different waveforms, the volume massively increases on this. So from 0 to sawtooth only, sawtooth and pulse, which you don't get that on these. To sawtooth and pulse, same volume. I've just showed you that really, because when you're trying to match things, when you're trying to compare, the volume on this is going up and down compared to this. There you go. Different sounds anyway. Let's knock it back to the sawtooth then. So just for completeness, I'll mention the subs. The sub on this is a square wave and it's 1 octave below VCO1. On this we've got oscillator 2, which is like an enhanced version of the 106 sub. So it's a square wave, but you can adjust the pitch. It's got a sort of wave shaping facility and pitch modulation as well. But if we listen to it, it's a nice square. And what that means is that we can actually do some more similar sounds with this than we could with the Prophet 6 in a way, although that had the 24 dB filter, because anything with a sub on this sounds similar to that, because that square wave sub does give a different feel to sounds. It's a bit more gritty. The triangle on the Prophet 6 gives it sort of a low, nice, meaty tone, whereas this gives some sort of girth. So just to look at the oscilloscope quickly, you can see that's got a slight curve to it, but it's a square. And as I've said before, I think your ears just hear the change from positive to negative. And that's a really nice looking square as well. And just to show you the tone modulation on this, it's sort of like a wave shaping. It sort of adds an extra sort of lump in there. There you can see the extra peak. So it's not quite PWM, which is this. Just simply changing the sort of wave shape width, whereas this tone modulation sort of flips it over on itself, doesn't it? So any tones that use the tone mod or this sort of shape are difficult or impossible to get on that. So moving quickly on to the filters, this is famous for its SEM style filter, which has got variable state from low pass to notch to high pass with a bandpass mode as well. This has got a 2-pole or a 4-pole low pass and a high pass with a boost. So limiting really how you can compare the two together. This is so unique. But what I'll do is I'll just show you how you can sort of do this sort of tones when it's in low pass mode on this. And if we look at just the filter sweep, and then quickly on here, let's turn that up. And now quickly on here. That goes to 0, that doesn't. Or goes very low at least. And now this is the interesting part when we start playing with the resonance. So I'll throw the resonance up on full on this. And you can see on the frequency analysis that there's a little peak there, isn't there, at about 19 kilohertz. And as a sweep down, that'll move down. Taking it around 1 kilohertz, it's just a little bit higher than the main fundamental. So let's try that on this. Now the resonance on this is wild. If you've seen any of the other videos, you'll know that. So watch out for your ears here. I'll just turn this on to full. This is going to be horrible because it's so loud. So let's never put it on full if we're trying to emulate this. Knock it down to about 6.5. Volume back up. And what we notice straight away actually is that you've lost the bass. You lost a lot of volume. Which is what the Roland style filters do. This doesn't do that. This keeps its volume, as the Prophet 6 did as well. Moogs, as you know, a mini Moog will drop its volume. Not a bad thing, just a different thing. Okay. So. And after playing around with this, keep this around between 6 and 7 as a maximum for this. But what you'll notice there is that the resonant peak that we're pulling up there is a bit wider than what you get from this. And this is why on this you get those sort of fizzy sounds, I call them. You just got a tiny little bit of high frequencies in there. And it just gives it a little bit of excitement. No other synth does it as well as this. You see how much wider that is? If I pull this up to 10 kilohertz, then try and emulate that on this. It's a much tighter peak. About 3. So the resonance there's got much more effect on the sound. It's got a wider frequency base. Is it a wider Q or is that smaller or a bigger Q? Anyway. So trying to emulate this on this, or most synth, is difficult, just because of the sounds of the resonance, and that is the character of the filter, and you can't really get around that. But let's try and match them as much as we can. So 1 kilohertz. And again, you can see the resonant peak is just below the fundamental, which is what I'm trying to balance out on here. Yes, it's tighter, isn't it? So if you think about it from a format perspective, which I often say, one's sort of more of a... It feels like if you're going to emulate the sound, you've got to change the shape of your mouth. And interestingly, as I move higher up the frequency range on this, so let's put it there at about 8. You need to knock that up a little bit higher from 6 to about 7 to sort of match the peak on this. So the peak on this actually gets higher the higher up the frequency you go without playing with the resonance. As I say, really difficult to match them. You're never going to match them to different filters, they sound different. So if you're trying to emulate OB6 on this, don't take your resonance over 6, absolute maximum 7 if you're doing high up. This doesn't self-oscillate, this does wildly. So bearing that in mind, I'm never going to get them to match identical, but I've taken the filter, stick it through an envelope, a little bit of resonance. And you can hear the sort of vowel sounds in those are slightly different, and you're never going to match them. But that's not really what I'm doing here. Nice though. So I've taken that sound and I've turned that into a pulse width modulated with the envelope on the filter as well.